I was on a hillside in central Idaho when my phone rang. Not unusual. When you're a smoke jumper, your phone rings at all kinds of hours. Dispatch, weather updates, crew coordinators. You learn to answer fast and listen faster. So when I felt it vibrate in my chest pocket, I pulled it out without thinking much about it. I figured it was work. I figured it was something about the fire we'd been managing 2 ridges over. It was my sister-in-law, Dana. Now, Dana doesn't call me at work. She knows better than most people what my schedule looks like. A month on, 2 weeks off, and when I'm on. She knows that. So the second I saw her name on that screen, something shifted in my chest. Not panic, not yet, but something. Like the air pressure changed. Like the way a forest goes quiet right before a storm rolls in, and everything just holds its breath for a second. I answered. She said, "Ben, I need you to stay calm." Those are never good words. Nobody who calls you with good news starts by asking you to stay calm. I stepped away from the crew, walked maybe 20 yards up the slope, away from the sound of the equipment, away from the radio chatter, and I said, "Dana, what happened?" Not a question, a statement, because some part of me already knew that whatever she was about to say was going to change the shape of the next few hours, maybe longer. She said, "It's Grace. Grace, my wife. She'd taken some time off while I was on rotation. She does that sometimes. She's better at being alone than most people I know, better at filling her own days. She hikes, she reads, she drives out to places and sits and watches the light change on the hills, and she comes home and tells me about it, and I love that about her. I love that she doesn't need me to entertain her. I love that she has her own relationship with the land. I love that she goes out into it and isn't afraid. She'd gone out on a trail, a canyon trail not far from home. One she'd done before, not a beginner's route, but nothing technical, a trail she knew, and she hadn't come back. Dana told me they'd been looking for 2 days already. 2 days. I want to sit with that number for a second, because when she said it, the ground felt like it shifted under my feet. 2 days. They hadn't called me for 2 days because they didn't want to pull me from the job, didn't want to worry me until they had to. And because, and Dana said this carefully, gently, the way you say something you know is going to land hard. Because they were sure they were going to find her. They'd been sure. Search and rescue had been out. Friends had walked the trail. And then the day before, they'd called in a helicopter. A helicopter. And they still hadn't found her. The crew chief was watching me from down the hill. I turned my back to him. I looked out over the canyon we'd been working in. Smoke-stained ridgelines, scorched timber, the whole landscape torn open and raw the way fire leaves things. And I said to Dana, very quietly, "I'm coming home." She said, "Ben, I know. We know you'll find her. We know if anyone can find her, it's you." I don't remember exactly what I said after that. I remember telling the crew chief I had a family emergency. I remember him nodding without asking questions, because that's the kind of man he is. I remember sitting in the truck on the way back to the base and staring at the road and not thinking about anything specific, just running the facts through my head like a checklist. Trail, canyon, 2 days, helicopter, no contact. My wife had been missing for 2 days in a canyon in Idaho in October. I know what October means up here. I know what the nights feel like when the temperature drops and the wind comes down out of the north and the ground gets hard. I know what 2 nights of exposure can do to a person who wasn't prepared for them. And I know Grace. I know she's strong. I know she's smart. I know she would have made good decisions in those first hours. But 2 days is 2 days, and a helicopter had been out and hadn't found her. I didn't let myself go too far down that road. You learn that in this work. You learn to keep your thinking clean and forward-facing, because the moment you start running catastrophic scenarios in your head, you lose the ability to function, and function is the only thing that helps anybody. So I focused on what I was going to do, not on what might have already happened. I focused on the next step, and then the next one after that. I got home just after dark. The house was lit up. Dana's car was in the driveway and 2 others I recognized. Friends of Grace's, people who'd been out looking. I walked through the front door, and it was one of those moments where a room full of people looks at you, and you can see in every face what they're carrying. Relief that I was there, fear about what that meant, hope, and underneath the hope, something more fragile than hope. Dana hugged me. She held on longer than she normally would, and I let her, because I understood what it meant. She'd been keeping it together for 2 days, and I was the person she'd been waiting for. And now I was there, and she could finally let a little of it go. Someone had printed out a trail map. It was on the kitchen table, annotated in pen, the search areas, the sections that had been covered, the sections that hadn't. I stood over it for a long time. I asked questions. Where had her car been found? What time had it been parked there? Based on the sun position in the trail camera footage. What direction had the helicopter been flying? What part of the canyon had been swept on foot and what part hadn't? People answered and I listened, and I kept looking at the map. There's a particular kind of attention you develop as a smoke jumper, a way of reading terrain from above and translating it into what it means on the ground. You learn to think about how water moves, how wind moves, how fire moves. And all of those things are governed by the same underlying logic, the shape of the land. A canyon is a funnel. Things go into canyons and sometimes they don't come back out. Not because canyons are malicious, but because they're complicated. They fold back on themselves. They have false floors and hidden drops in sections that look passable from one angle and aren't from another. I looked at the map and I thought about where a person might go if they left the trail. Not by choice. Grace wouldn't have left the trail by choice. She's not reckless. She's not the kind of person who decides to go off-route on a solo hike without telling anyone. She went out with a plan and she would have stuck to that plan for as long as she could. So if she wasn't on the trail, something had happened to put her off it. A slip, a wrong step, a section of trail that had eroded since the last time she'd walked it. I thought about the sections on the map that were marked as unsearched. I thought about the contour lines, the places where the canyon dropped steeply, where the walls closed in, where the creek at the bottom would be running cold and loud enough to drown out a voice. I picked up the map and I folded it and I put it in my pocket. I told Dana I was going out. She looked at me. It was past 9 o'clock. It was dark and cold, and I'd been working since before dawn, and I'd driven for 4 hours. She looked at me and she started to say something about waiting until morning, about going out with the search team at first light, and I looked at her and she stopped. She stopped because she knows me. She knows what I do. She knows that I have jumped out of aircraft into the path of wildfires in the dark, that I have walked burning ridge lines at 2 in the morning with a chainsaw in a 40-pound pack. That darkness is not a reason to stop. Darkness is just a condition. You adapt to conditions. She handed me a thermos of coffee without saying another word. Nah, I loaded my pack at the tailgate in the driveway. Headlamp, backup headlamp, extra batteries, first aid kit, a real one, not the foil wrapper and a bandage kit people keep in their glove boxes, a thermal blanket, rope, water, the coffee, my radio, a jacket, gloves, a wool hat. I didn't overload it. You want to move fast when you're searching, and weight slows you down. You take what you need and nothing else, and you know what you need because you've spent enough time in the field to have that list memorized somewhere below conscious thought. I drove to the trailhead. Grace's car was still there. It was the only car in the lot. The Park Service had put a notice on the windshield, one of those orange slips that says the vehicle has been flagged as part of an active search. I stood next to her car for a moment. I put my hand on the hood, which was cold, which it would be, which told me nothing I didn't already know. I stood there and I looked up the trail into the dark and I thought about her, walking this same path 2 days ago in the morning light, with her water bottle and her hiking boots and whatever she'd been thinking about. And I breathed through that thought and then I put it away and I started walking. The headlamp lit maybe 15 feet in front of me. The trail was good here, wide and well-maintained, gravel surface, the kind of trail that sees regular foot traffic. The canyon walls were invisible in the dark, just a weight on either side of me. The sky, a narrow strip of stars overhead. It was cold. My breath came in small clouds and dissolved in the beam of the lamp. My boots on the gravel were the loudest thing in the world. There is something that happens to your mind when you walk in the dark searching for someone you love. It's not like any other kind of thinking. It's not panic, and it's not calm. It's something else. Something suspended between the two. A kind of focused dread that keeps you sharp without breaking you open. Every shadow at the edge of the light is something you look at and assess and dismiss, or don't dismiss. Every sound, every crack of branch, every shift of gravel, every gust through the canyon, you filter it, run it through the question, is that her? Could that be her? I walked fast, not recklessly fast, but the pace of someone with purpose. I followed the trail deeper into the canyon, and the walls came up on either side, and the creek got louder below me to the left, and I kept scanning. I was looking for anything that was wrong, anything that didn't fit, a disturbance in the gravel, a broken branch at the wrong height, a piece of fabric caught on a thorn bush. You look for the thing that doesn't belong, and you train yourself to see it even when your eyes want to skip over it, even when the dark is full of shapes that all look the same. I was maybe a mile and a half in when I stopped. I don't know exactly what made me stop. That sounds like something people say when they're trying to make a story sound more dramatic than it was, but I mean it honestly. I'm not entirely sure what it was that made my feet slow down and then stop moving. Some combination of things. The way the trail bent here, the angle of the wall on the left side, the way the creek sounded slightly different, louder, more vertical, which meant a drop somewhere below. The contour of the land matched something I'd been holding in my mind from the map, a section I'd looked at and thought about without quite being able to say why. I stood still for a moment and I looked around and I thought, if I had gone off this trail, it would have been here, not somewhere else. Here. The outside edge of the trail at this point dropped away into scrub, low brush, loose rock, the ground tilting down toward the creek. In the daylight, you could see it clearly. In the dark, with a headlamp, you could see maybe 6 feet into it before it just became a wall of shadow. I started to move forward again, and that's when I saw it. A scuff mark. Just a scuff. In the gravel at the very edge of the trail, where the maintained surface ended and the loose rock began. A place where the gravel had been displaced, scraped to the side, like a boot had caught it. It could have been anything. A deer, an earlier hiker, wind-displaced rock. It could have been a dozen things that weren't Grace. But I stopped. I crouched down and I looked at it in the beam of my headlamp, and I thought about what a scuff like that would mean, the direction of the displacement, the depth of it, and I thought about a person walking this trail in the fading light of a late afternoon, because that's when she would have been coming back. That's when she would have been on this section, the light already going golden and thin, the shadows already deep in the canyon. And I thought about a step that didn't land quite right, a boot that slipped on loose gravel at the edge of the trail, a moment of imbalance that couldn't be corrected in time. I sat down on the trail. I turned off my headlamp. The dark came in like water filling a room, total and immediate. I let my eyes adjust for a moment, let the starlight from that narrow strip of sky above the canyon work its way down to me. And then I did the thing that every instinct was screaming at me not to do, the thing that went against every search protocol, every training, every professional habit. I stopped being quiet. I cupped my hands around my mouth and into the darkness below the trail, down into that slope of scrub and loose rock and shadow. I called out as loud as I could. Grace, this is Ben. I'm on the trail above you. I'm here. I'm not leaving until I find you. If you can hear me, make any sound you can. Any sound at all. I stopped and I listened. The creek, the wind moving through the canyon above, the sound of my own breathing, which I made myself slow down. I called again. Grace, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone anymore. I need you to make a sound for me. I listened, and then, faint. So faint that I thought for one terrible second that I'd imagined it, that my mind was making the sound because it needed to hear it. There was something. Not a word. Not even a clear sound. More like a change in the quality of the air below me. A vibration, a presence. I turned my headlamp back on and I went over the edge of the trail. The slope was worse than it had looked on the map. It wasn't a gradual decline. It dropped sharply in the first 10 feet, loose rock and dead brush, the kind of surface that would give absolutely no purchase to someone who wasn't expecting it. That would take a person down fast before they had any chance to arrest the fall. I dug my heels in and moved sideways across it, working down slowly, keeping my weight back, using my hands on the rock when I needed to. The beam of my headlamp swung back and forth across the slope ahead of me. I called her name every 30 seconds. The slope went down, and then there was a section, a ledge almost, a false floor covered in scrub oak and dead grass. And then it dropped again, another steep section, more serious than the first. I stood on that ledge and I swept my light across it and across the drop below it, and I tried to calculate in my head how far a person would go if they went off the trail at the scuff mark and couldn't stop themselves on the upper section. Far. They'd go far. I went down the second section. It was harder. There was a point where I had to essentially lower myself from a rock shelf, drop the last few feet to a wider section of slope, land on loose gravel and stay upright. I managed it, and as I straightened up and swept my light ahead of me, I heard it again. Clearer this time, unmistakably a voice, unmistakably human. Coming from below me and to the right, somewhere in the darkness where the creek was loudest, where the slope leveled out into a rocky creek bed. I said her name, not a shout this time, just her name, clearly, firmly, and she said mine. Her voice was weak, thin, the kind of voice that comes from a person who has been using the last of something for a long time. But it was her voice, and it was real, and it was there, in the dark below me. And I have jumped out of aircraft into burning mountains, and I have done things that people describe as brave. And I want to say, honestly, that the 30 seconds it took me to get from where I was standing to where Grace was lying on the rocks next to that creek were the longest and most frightening 30 seconds of my life. She was on her back. She'd pulled herself as far as she could into a space between two large rocks, which had given her some shelter from the wind, and, I understood this immediately, without her having to explain it, had kept her from moving, which was good, because she didn't know how badly she was hurt, and staying still was exactly the right call. Her jacket was zipped to her chin. Her pack was still on, which had cushioned some of the fall and had kept her core warm. She had her phone out. No signal, she told me later. She'd had no signal the entire time. But she'd been using the screen as a light source when she needed to and conserving the battery when she didn't. She'd been doing everything right. She'd been holding on. I got down next to her and I put my hand on her face and I said, "I've got you. I've got you now. You're okay." She said, "I knew you'd come." Not I hoped, not I thought. I knew. I got my headlamp properly on her and I ran a quick assessment. Not because I'm a paramedic, I'm not, but because you spend enough years doing backcountry work and you learn to look at a person and understand what's urgent and what can wait. Her color was poor, but not critical. She was coherent. She knew where she was, what day she thought it was, who I was. She was cold, very cold, but she was shivering, which meant her body was still fighting, which is what you want to see. You stop worrying when they stop shivering. Her left leg was the problem. She'd known it was broken since the first day. She told me she'd felt it go. Not the pain, not at first, but the structural wrongness of it, the way the leg didn't respond the way it should when she'd tried to get up. She'd been smart about it. She hadn't tried to walk on it. She'd assessed the slope above her, decided she couldn't safely climb it alone in the dark, and she'd made herself a shelter between the rocks, and she'd waited. 2 nights, alone on the rocks next to a creek in a canyon in October with a broken leg. I wrapped her in the thermal blanket. I got the coffee into her, slowly, making sure she could swallow properly, watching her hands on the thermos. Her coordination was okay. Shaky, but okay. I radioed in. I gave them our position as accurately as I could. GPS coordinates, canyon section, creek landmark. The voice that came back was calm and professional, said they had us, said they were mobilizing, said to stay put and keep her warm. I sat down next to my wife on the rocks and I held her and I talked to her while we waited for the team to come. She told me about the fall. It had happened fast. A loose section of trail she hadn't seen in the changing light. her right foot going out from under her, the slope catching her before she could react. She'd gone down that upper section fast and then over the ledge before she could arrest it, and the leg had gone on the rocks at the bottom. She'd been dazed for a while. She didn't know how long. She thought maybe an hour. And by the time her head had cleared properly, it was dark, and she couldn't see the trail above her, and she could hear the creek, and she'd made the decision to stay where she was. She said she'd heard helicopters. I asked her why she hadn't signaled. She said she had. She'd used the reflective panel on her pack. She'd used her phone screen. She'd waved her jacket. But the helicopter had gone over early in the morning, she said, before the canyon got much light, when she was still deep in shadow at the bottom of the gorge. They'd been looking for a person, and what they'd been able to see from the air was a canyon full of shadow and rock and scrub and creek. And a person at the bottom of that blends in ways that are easy to miss when you're moving fast and scanning a wide area. I knew that. I understood that. It wasn't anyone's failure. The canyon had hidden her. The rescue team came in from above. I heard them on the radio first, then their lights on the upper section of slope, 4 headlamps moving carefully down the terrain. I'd come down in the dark. The team leader was a man named Roy, compact and efficient, the kind of person who comes into a situation and immediately understands the geometry of it. He looked at Grace, asked her the assessment questions, nodded at her answers. They had a litter, a lightweight rescue stretcher. Getting her up the slope on it was not a simple thing. That terrain in the dark with a loaded stretcher requires a particular kind of coordinated effort. Everyone reading each other, everyone communicating, everyone trusting that the people next to them know what they're doing. It took time and it took care, and Roy's team gave it both. We got to the top. We got to the trail. We walked out. At the trailhead, the ambulance was waiting. I walked next to the litter with my hand on Grace's arm the whole way, and she kept her eyes on me, and I kept my eyes on her, and we didn't say much of anything because there wasn't anything to say that mattered more than just being there, just being present, just being the fixed point that the other person is oriented to. The EMTs were good. They were kind to her. They worked efficiently and spoke to her by name, and I stood back and let them do their job. Dana was at the trailhead. She'd come down when she'd heard the radio traffic. She was standing by the ambulance with her hand over her mouth, and when they brought Grace out on the stretcher, she made a sound that I don't have a word for, a sound that I will carry with me for a long time, because it was the sound of someone who has been holding their breath for 2 days, finally being allowed to breathe. Grace's leg needed surgery, plates and screws, the kind of repair that takes months to fully heal and leaves you with a scar you'll have for the rest of your life. She spent 4 days in the hospital, and I was there for all of them. I sat in the chair next to her bed, and we watched bad television and ate bad food and talked more than we'd probably talked in years. The way you talk when you've just been reminded that talking is something you get to do, that it's not guaranteed, that the ordinary act of sitting with someone and saying whatever comes into your head is something that can be taken from you without any warning at all. She told me she'd thought about a lot of things down in that canyon. I told her I hadn't thought about anything except finding her. She said she knew that. She said she'd known I was coming. She said she'd felt it, not in a mystical way. She's not that kind of person, but in the plain and simple way that you know certain things about the people you love, the things they will do and won't do, the things they're made of. She said she'd known that if she just held on, I was going to come down off whatever mountain I was on and come find her. I've thought about that a lot since, about what it means to be that kind of person for someone, about whether I've always been that person or whether it's something that happened to me gradually through the years of this work, through the years of going into hard situations and coming back out of them, about whether the work made me who I am or whether I was always this way and the work just gave me a place to put it. I don't know the answer to that. What I know is that when I turned off my headlamp on that trail and sat in the dark and called out into the canyon, I wasn't doing anything heroic. I was doing the only thing there was to do. I was refusing to leave. And maybe that's all any of it is, really. The search, the jump, the long nights on the fire line. You show up and you refuse to leave until the thing is done. You keep going when the terrain is bad and the light is gone and you can't see what's in front of you. You trust your training and your instincts and the people next to you. And sometimes, if you're lucky, if the outcome breaks the right way, the darkness gives something back. Grace started hiking again the following spring. Not the canyon trail, not at first. Shorter routes, flatter ground, building the leg back up slowly. But by June, she was back on the longer trails. By August, she was doing the ridgelines again. She called me one evening from a summit. I was on rotation, 2 ridges away, and my phone rang, and it was Grace, and she said, "I'm up on the ridge. The light is incredible up here. I just wanted you to know where I was." I stood there on the hillside with the radio chatter and the sound of the crew and the smell of smoke all around me, and I listened to her voice on the phone, and I thought about what it costs to keep the things you love, what it takes to go into the dark after them, what it means to come back out. I said, "I'm glad you called." She said, "I'll always call." And she does.